On today's show, we start our NHL season previews. We're starting with the Eastern Conference today. Talk about some of the teams that are playoff bound, some that are not, and what breakout hobby stars could be on the horizon. This is episode 21 of the Hockey Card Haven podcast. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. This is the Hockey Card Haven podcast with myself, Mike Distefano, and my co-host Anthony Santini, here to dive deep into the world of hockey card collecting, flipping, and investing. What's going on, Anth? How you feeling on a Wednesday?
What's up, buddy?
Actually, we got to address something off the top. I'm going to call you up for something, okay? You got to explain yourself. The people need to know. The people need to know, and I want to know in the comments, what people think of the situation that I'm looking at on the screen right now. Anthony, who is your favorite hockey team?
Oh, my goodness.
Who is your favorite hockey team?
The Bruins, man. The Bruins.
How could you possibly wear that hat on your head? Like, I trust me, I Leaf fan. I love that you're wearing that cap. But if I were to ever wear a Bruins hat on my head, I would probably ask you to shoot me. Like, it's not something that I will ever do, ever. And I don't see how somebody who could be a fan of one team support the merchandise and paraphernalia of their arch rival. I just don't understand it.
I mean, style-wise, I'm all over the map with like wearing different teams. Last week, I know I had the Dolphins hat on. I was actually going to wear that today, but I was like, okay, I wore it last week. I wasn't sure. This was actually a gift given to me. And for those of you that know me, I'm a big Matthews fan. So that's kind of my thing with the Leafs. And obviously hometown from Toronto. So tough to miss any Leafs game that's happening because when you're in the city, when you're at home, it's the only thing that's on TV. So I watch a ton of Leafs games, but I've always been a Bruins fan growing up. And I don't know, I feel like the past 2 weeks, there's been way too many comments about like hats I'm wearing or like a shirt or something. I think I just got to switch to baseball because I feel like baseball is the only merchandise, hats, shirts, sweaters, anything where anyone could kind of like wear anything. Like you could see someone wear like a White Sox hat and not even affiliate them as a White Sox fan. It's just kind of like a fan of the hat. So I feel like I'm just switching right back to baseball. No more hockey, no more football hats, like nothing. No more sweaters, no more t-shirts. So next week, I think you guys are just going to catch me with a nice like Yankees hat or something. I can't even name a player on the Yankees. Actually, Aaron Judge.
It is funny that you're right. And I think, what was the song? There was the Jay-Z song that said, I make a Yankee hat more famous than a Yankee can. And like, it's kind of true. Yeah. Like it's very true where like the baseball caps, just the way that they've just like dominated popular culture from a style perspective is kind of wild. Don't think you can get away with it as much in hockey. People look at it and they're like, oh, Leaf fan? Like, no, Bruins fan. And then you're going to get people looking at you with Scrabble faces. What the hell are you doing with a Leafs hat on? And that's what I saw you pop on today. And I'm like, what is this guy wearing? I had to bring it up. I had to bring it up. Let me know in the comments if you think that's a faux pas for Anthony, a Bruins fan, to be rocking Leafs gear. Not just in public, but like on a public podcast that goes out to the world. I just can't seem to fathom that. That being said, Anthony, we'll be talking about both of these teams today because we're doing a little Eastern Conference preview. This week we're going to be talking about the teams in the East. Next week we'll be talking about the teams in the West. And then the following week, which is pretty much the first day of the NHL regular season, a couple weeks from now, we'll be ready to go and we'll do like a full breakdown and we'll make our predictions and all that. And so I'm looking forward to it. So we've got kind of a 3-week plan of what we're going to do on the podcast here as we gear up for the start of the regular season. The preseason is underway now, which we weren't able to say a week ago. You've been keeping an eye on, some of the games, some of the stuff that's been going on in the preseason over the last few days.
Yeah, it's been fun to tune in, and I don't know what it is, but there's nothing better than the background noise of hockey, even when you can't pay attention to the game. I was doing a little bit of homework, trying to focus on the Leafs Senators game the other night where the Leafs, oh my God, man, Matt Sogard, and I picked him up. I picked up a future watch of him on Sunday, and then watching him at night let the Leafs score, I think 5 it was on him. it was just like a sight to see. So I was doing a little bit of homework with the game on in the background, and there's no other feeling like it. It feels like I've been missing that all summer. So even though we aren't in the regular season, it's been awesome to tune in. Like last night, I watched Kraken Canucks with my girlfriend, and that was fun. We watched the first period in a little bit, and it was definitely one of those games that, mid-November, late December, I could never see myself tuning into past 10 o'clock. But right now, I feel like all hockey fans are just dying for a game like that. So it's
Yeah,
been
it's fresh, it's new, it scratches the itch, right? Totally scratches the itch. Although in the next day or two, like I'll be ready for regular season hockey, though. I will
oh
say, that,
yeah.
like the Leafs game last night, Leafs and Sens, I was a bit of a snoozer. I'll say that. That was just like it was a good checking game if you enjoy structure and all that. If you're looking for entertainment, wasn't the game at the top of the list. I'll say that. But why don't we get right to it, Anthony? Actually, let's start with those two teams. Let's start with the team that you're rocking on top of your head. So we're going to be doing the Eastern Conference preview. So we'll start with the Atlantic, then we'll move on to the Metropolitan. We'll kind of take a look at each team, how we think they're going to fare. And then from a hobby perspective, like, is there somebody who you're looking at? Is there someone you think is undervalued, a player to watch, a possible hobby breakout candidate? So we'll go into all of these factors for each team in the East. We'll do the same next week on the podcast for the Western Conference, and then do a full season preview prediction show 2 Wednesdays from now, which is the start of the NHL regular season. So let's start things off with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Anthony, the Leafs, it's a brand new season. They're coming in with a brand new head coach with Craig Berube. They've got a new captain, technically, sliding from John Tavares over to Austin Matthews. How do you think the Maple Leafs are going to fare this year?
There's been a lot of talk about the Leafs all season, all off season. It feels like there always is too, but even still, I find them pretty neutral compared to last year because of the changes they made in the offseason. It always feels like there's like a big buzz in the city when there's people coming in. Tanev comes in. Obviously, the changes in net starter looks like it's going to be Joseph Wall, and obviously we got Anthony Stolarz as the backup now. We saw Hildeby last night coming up in the prospect pool, which will be eventually. But for this season, I don't see too much of a change for the Leafs. I see them as one of the better teams in their division, but not one of the better teams in the league. I feel like that defense is still going to struggle, as it always does. And obviously, the top end players will start to break out, the likes of Austin Matthews, William Nylander. And I think we're even going to see a big season out of Mitch Marner finally cracking that 100 point milestone.
Yeah, I agree with pretty much all of what you just said. I think that this is a team that, they'll compete for the top of the Atlantic Division, but there's still a little ways away from being considered Stanley Cup contenders for me. Well, I shouldn't say that. I think they're contenders, but being like legitimate, serious, like top three, top four type of contender. I still think that that's, there's some work to be done, and I think that ultimately, I want to see what they look like under the new coach. It's a new system. It'll be interesting to see how different this team plays, and if that's going to impact the market at all. Like if this team decides to play more defensive, they want to play north south. Like is that going to detract some of the creativity that the Maple Leafs have, like guys like Mitch Marner, William Nylander, Tavares, Matthews, and is that going to, not allow them to score as many goals as they have in the past because, they've got just different things that they're worried about, and they're going to play a little bit more of a two-way game. Nylander now shifting over to center. What does that look like? Is that going to improve his offensive production, or is that going to, make him more focused on playing a 200-foot game? And could that possibly, subtract some goals from his total where he's hit 2 straight 40-goal seasons? I'm curious to see what it all looks like, to be honest with you. And that's the beauty of, new coach, new team, new systems. It'll take a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months for this team to get rolling. But ultimately, I think that they're going to be a pretty good squad as per usual. Austin Matthews, I mean, his hockey card market's gonna kind of roller coaster throughout the season like it usually does. But we saw it get as high as 1,800 Canadian last year when he was on the road to 70 goals. Stopped just short at 69, and then you saw it kind of tail off the market, and I think it's settled in the playoffs around 1,200, 1,300. bottomed out to about $1,000, 1,100 throughout the summer, and starting to tick back up a little bit. So I'd imagine we'll see a lot of similar cases with a lot of these players. I've seen, Marner really crash throughout the summer, but I think he is going to be in for a good season as well. We'll see that to climb back up. But the player to watch, a kind of hobby breakout star, and I know both of us are pretty big on him, is Matthew Knies for me. Right now, he's skating on a top line with Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner. And I mean, we saw guys like Michael Bunting, put together pretty solid seasons playing with those two guys. Knies is far more, just skilled and bigger, faster, stronger, everything. He's got more finish to him. He's a pretty polished prospect at this point. He's had a full year under his belt. Matthew Knies right now is a player for me to watch as a potential hobby breakout star this season. I could see him potting 25 to 30 goals in his sophomore campaign, upwards of 70-ish points this season. And in Toronto, playing with those two players, Matthews and Marner, I really think we could see those prices start to climb and tick back up. There'll be a lot of demand, right? Hype drives the hobby. There's going to be a lot of hype behind Knies if he can stick with those two players. So that's one player in particular that I'm kind of keeping an eye on as a potential hobby breakout star this year.
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head with Knies too, because that was my angle that I wanted to take with him being on the first line now. All eyes are going to be on him, and the opportunity to play with two of the best players on one of the most watched teams in the NHL is just going to drive that opportunity. It's a no-brainer. I mean, at the end of the day, even if he doesn't play well, there's still going to be talk on him. I feel like that will kind of hold his hobby price afloat. I don't see him playing terrible, like dropping to the third, fourth line just because of how talented he is as a player. We've seen it in the playoffs. We've seen him perform against Tampa, and even last season, obviously the opportunity that he was given with the sprinkling of being on Matthews and Marner's line, I feel like this year is the years of Matthew Knies.
And he was dominant in the playoffs too. He's one of the best players for the Leafs against your Boston Bruins. So I just think he continues that, right? Continues that forward into this season. Put on another 10 pounds. He's like 230 pounds now. Like, he's a big boy. He's gonna park himself in front of the net. He'll go into the corners, win some puck battles, and I think Knies is in for quite a year. So his current value right now for his PSA 10 Young Gun is in the range of $150 Canadian. Which isn't cheap. I would say that it kind of already has an established market right now, but again, in Toronto, things can get a little wacky, and I still think that Knies could climb with that being the case. All right, let's move on to the next team, and it's the squad that resides in Ontario alongside with the Maple Leafs, the team that beat Toronto in 2 preseason games under new head coach Travis Green, former Maple Leafs. It's all coming full circle. So they got a new coach. They got a new goaltender too, Linus Ullmark, who we have not yet seen through the first couple of games of preseason. Is this the year that the Ottawa Senators make a push and finally make the playoffs, Anthony?
I think so. I think after last year's aspirations of making the playoffs and a massive fall off that came just 30% through the season, we started to see the Senators really fall off. This trade of Allmark as a starting goaltender is going to be huge for them. I think there's a lot of opportunity with Senators players. I can name off so many that I think are going to have a breakout year. A lot of opportunity in fantasy, a lot of opportunity for the hobby, a lot of opportunity for players that are upcoming in free agency. I think the Senators have finally found the opportunity to make the playoffs. The big announcement coming just 2 days ago that there will be the new arena come 2029, I believe, is the expected date. Mm-hmm. But for me, I think I do have the Senators in the playoffs. And finally, we're going to see the Ottawa Senators maybe win a playoff round, because we haven't seen it in just a little bit.
Possibly. Let's make the playoffs first. I think they're going to be in the mix. They're definitely going to be in the mix with Buffalo and Detroit and some of the other teams in the Metro when it comes to one of the wild card spots. I do like the team a lot more this year than I have in the past. I think Ullmark's a great goalie, won the Vezina a couple of years ago. I think Travis Green's a good coach. Didn't end well for him, obviously, in Vancouver, but I think that he should get that team playing in the right direction. Yeah, you mentioned it. There are a lot of players that I think could be considered, hobby breakouts, and I think a team, if they can make that step and make that leap, it's because they're going to have a lot of these young players and guys we've been waiting on when it comes to taking that next step on the ice. I think it's because they're going to take that next step. I'm looking at a guy like Shane Pinto, who, I've been talking about him all summer, and I still think that he could possibly be that hobby breakout kind of player. He's still very young, just 23 years old. He's coming off that suspension, but, after jumping on a moving train last year, still had 27 points in 41 games and, was one of the top, as a top six centerman for that team. So I think Shane Pinto has an opportunity to come in and really establish himself as like a good two-way centerman on the Ottawa Senators. He's not very expensive. You can get his PSA 10 Young Guns right now for, $50, $55. And if it's a team that's, going to be playoff bound, I think it's because this guy in particular, took a big step in his game. And I think that the market will appreciate that and will ramp up for a guy like him. So Shane Pinto is one of my hobby breakouts candidates for this year. Did you have one in particular you want to spotlight?
I was looking at the forwards, and I feel like there's so many players. Like I mentioned, I can name Josh Norris, Tim Stützle, Brady Tkachuk, Shane Pinto, like all kinds of players. But I'm going to go to the back end, and I feel like with Jake Sanderson finally finding the opportunity on the power play, should overstep Thomas Chabot as he looks to make an exit from the Senators pretty soon. I know there's been trade talks of eventually moving him out, but Sanderson is a tough look as a defenseman because we know what the hobby looks at when it comes for players to burst out. That's goal scoring, but with the ability to play on what could be a really talented power play, I'm all over Jake Sanderson and his PSA 10 Young Gun for $80. I mean, anywhere between $50 and $80, I'll scoop them up. So
Yeah, I think you can like I sold his future watch a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and I think it was only like an $80
yeah,
future watch
$80.
at that point. And it's like, man, if Sanderson goes off and puts himself into the echelon, I don't think he's quite, in that Cale Makar, Quinn Hughes range, but he can go out there and get himself in like that Noah Dobson range where he can get you 60 to 70 points, quarterback a power play. And I think that could be something where you could certainly see, those future watches get into the $100 range. You could see the PSA 10s get into the 150 ish range if he really, really does turn into that stud defenseman. So yeah, I think that's another good pick too, and definitely a possible breakout candidate. All right, let's move to La Belle Province with the Montreal Canadiens here. Anth, they had an interesting offseason. They brought in Patrick Laine via trade. There was a lot of intrigue with him coming to Montreal. Slavkovsky showed some great signs in the back half of last season. They're hoping he can continue that into year 3 in the NHL. Caulfield, Suzuki, good young group, good young club. Lane Hudson coming in. I think he's going to be a big chase for the Series 1. We'll get to that in a little bit in hobby news. But how do you feel like the Montreal Canadiens are going to fare this season? Is this the year they kind of take a step and compete for a playoffs, or are they still maybe a year or two away?
I think they're still a year or two away. They're going to have a talented team. I don't think it will be as bad as last season. Obviously, injury riddled, and the Kirby Dach show was supposed to happen last year. It was finally going to be the year that he was going to break out and become one of the better players on Montreal. Getting injured again, and it feels like his career has just kind of gone down that path, hoping for the best for him and a great season to come, hopefully. But I don't see Montreal even sniffing the playoffs. I think they're going to be talented. I think they're going to be exciting to watch. But with the question marks in goalie, I see Montembeault being a really good starter. I don't see their defense.
I like Montembeault. I would be honest with you. I think the Montreal I'm on an island on this one, but I think the Canadiens are not that they're going to make the playoffs, but I think that they're going to shock people in how well they're going to do. Like
Yeah.
you look at, they can score goals, man. Like Cole Caulfield, Jari Slavkovsky, Nick Suzuki, Patrick Laine. If Kirby Dach and Alex Newhook can stay healthy and play a full season, they've got a couple of young guys as well who could come up and score some goals and play some defense. Um, I don't think that they're going to be a dumpster fire. And I think Montembeault is actually a really good goalie. I think that he's going to get an opportunity, him and Game Primo, to kind of, platoon the net a little bit, probably more of like a 55-40 type split. But I don't think it's going to be a tire fire this year.
It won't be as bad. It won't be as bad, I agree. But the division that they're in is just so tough. Like you look at the Bruins, you look at Florida, you look at Toronto. We want Ottawa to get in. I mean, I don't see them getting in, but yeah, them surprising
But
people is
I don't think they're
definitely
that far off. I don't think they're that far away from Ottawa. I don't think they're that far away from Buffalo, Detroit. I think they're kind of in that mix. They may not finish out better than those teams, but I don't think that there's like a significant drop off from those teams to Montreal. I think that they're going to surprise people. I could be wrong,
yeah.
but I think
I
they
mean,
possibly could.
even like with Lane Hudson coming up too, there's going to be a lot of buzz with him, and obviously not doesn't have a young gun just yet. Eventually will, but for
I think he'll be in series one. I'm gonna they
ooh,
announced a release date actually. We'll get to that in hobby news, but I
nice.
believe he's going to be part of series one.
Nice. I mean, that's going to be super exciting. Obviously, we see any Montreal Canadiens player, their price just skyrocket. But I'm a little bit on the fence here. It's going to be tough for them to get in the playoffs in this division. But you're right; they are going to surprise a lot of people.
You got a hobby breakout candidate, guy you like
Mm.
to get some love this year?
There's so many players on this team. Any player you could pick and just say if they have a good game, their price is going to shoot up because that's what the Canadiens market feels like. But for me, it's Cole Caulfield. The ability for him to score goals and what's happened in the past year, year and a half with his prices just dipping. Like we're seeing his card go for a third of what it goes for. $50 for a raw young gun, which used to be up to $150, what they were going for at their
Yeah,
peak before
It it
Slafkovsky came around.
it debuted as like a 250 $250,
Yeah,
$300 card like on
yeah.
release day. Like it was now that was back in 2021 where things were just bananas. 2021, 2022, whatever it was, things were bananas. But yeah, like it's dropped significantly since then.
Yeah. And we've talked about it all the time. What makes the best hobby player all around? What makes the ability for their price to go up? It's goal scoring. And that mixed with being on the Montreal Canadiens, I feel like Cole Caulfield stacking up on them. If you could get them in good condition, obviously the young gun, PSA 10, going for that 180 to 220 range flying around there. There's not a lot of people looking to sell even under that. So if I'm you, and you've got some money to spend and you're looking for a Montreal Canadian, I'm all over Cole Caulfield.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think that he's probably the one to go out and get right now. I think just because now Slavkovsky's an interesting one because he's still young and could really take that next jump, but I feel like the price jump has kind of come already. People are
Yeah.
already expecting it and they're jumping on it. Whereas Caulfield, there's a big dip. There's been a slight correction. It started to go back up a little bit since the summer. But I think for sure if you can get, Caulfield PSA 10 for under $200, I think it's a pretty solid solid buy. All right, the Boston Bruins, your club, Anth. How you feeling about your bees, brother?
Hey, we're feeling good. Obviously, new center. We got Elias Lindholm. Right up the middle, we got Matthew Poitras now. Obviously, missing Bergeron, which has been a big gap. I thought last year the Bruins weren't going to be that good of a team. I actually had them out of the playoffs. And even 2 years ago, when they won the President's, or is it what's most points? Is it President's Trophy?
President's Trophy.
Even I had them out of the playoffs. I know Biz, he's talked about it on Spin Chicklets. He had them out of the playoffs, and then they go on to win the President's Trophy. But I feel like the Bruins are still going to be in that mix, making the playoffs. I don't see them making a push for the Stanley Cup, but in that same mix with the Toronto Maple Leafs, where they're a contender, but not a serious Stanley Cup contender. And with the opportunity for a lot of younger players, I know we're going to get into it for who my hobby breakout is, but I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for someone to step up on the Bruins.
There's some opportunity there. The Bruins are an interesting team. They just never seem to fall off is the thing. And they've done a really good job being able to retool on the fly. And they moved out the goalie who won a Vezina 2 years ago, and they somehow feel stronger in net. Assuming he signs a contract. That is a big question that's looming for the Boston Bruins. And even something that's looming, I guess, in the hobby. It's like if you're somebody who was getting a whole bunch of Swayman and piling up your Swaymans, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Yeah, I'm just not going to play until I get a contract." And if he sits out for a few weeks and doesn't play at all for a month or so, and then has to come in and he's rusty and has to jump on a moving train, maybe the year doesn't go as well as he'd like, and then it's like, oh God, Jeremy Swayman was supposed to be this great number one goalie, and he didn't turn out to be. I think his hobby market could take a bit of a dip if he doesn't sign. He is someone that I'm kind of looking at as a player to watch for that reason. Does he get to camp? Does he sign a deal? And then can he actually be a number one? Right? We don't know this, which is why the contract demands that are being reported are kind of insane to me. Someone was telling me yesterday that they had read a report that he's looking for Carey Price type of money, which is just wild. The guy's never been a starter. He's been a tandem goaltender his entire career. Not to say that he can't be, but I wouldn't be giving anyone 10 sheets if he hasn't proven that he can be a 60 plus game starter. That being said, I think if he's there and he could start and he could play the whole year, play 60 games for the Bruins, I think they're a playoff team. I do. I think that they can get it done. I like the addition of Lindholm. They brought in Zadorov on the back end to kind of add to those beastly physical, specimens that they usually like to pile up in Boston. So I think it's another team that is definitely going to be a highly competitive squad. Who's your hobby breakout candidate, though?
I got Matthew Poitras, and you bring up a lot of good points with Swayman and the opportunity for the Bruins to really they dropped the ball big time with that contract deal, like big time. And I think he's just licking his chops right now, knowing that Jonas Korpisalo is the backup, and if they want to start the season with Swayman, they're gonna have to pay him big time. That's a conversation for another day, because I feel like Don Sweeney has still a lot of work to do with 2.5 weeks left until the season. But with Matthew Poitras, I feel like his young gun, PSA 10, being at a $70 price point, there's still a lot of opportunity for it to go up, and for him to have the opportunity to step into that center one role, maybe even get on the power play, depending on how Lindholm meshes with some of the likes of Brad Marchand, David Pastrnak. It could be a little bit of a reach.
You think Poitras could overtake Lindholm as top line center?
I'm not saying that I think it's going to happen, but with new players coming in, maybe it doesn't work. Everyone always says, and I say it all the time, just because a new player comes in doesn't mean it's going to work. And who knows, maybe coming out of camp, David Pasternak's like, look, I can't deal with this guy. I can't deal with him on my line. It's just not going to work out. Look, just give me someone else. I don't care if you think that Poitras is going to drink too much that he can't handle, or eat whatever the phrase is, have too much on his plate. I need someone else on my line. I need someone fresh. And I feel like if they can mesh well, maybe Matthew Poitras could find himself higher up in the lineup than that third line.
I don't even think Poitras is legal to drink in the States. Like, I'm pretty sure he's only 20 years old. I'm pretty sure.
I think he's 20. He's 04, I believe. So that'd be 20.
Yeah.
20 years
so like he can't even drink. You said he drinks that he can't even drink. It's not even legally possible for him to do in the city of Boston. But yeah, that'll be interesting to see. I would hope that for Boston's sake, the guy they paid like $7.5 million a year turns out to be their number one center, as opposed to their second year player making league minimum. But hey, you never know. You never know. All right, the Tampa Bay Lightning. Interesting squad, real interesting squad. Last year, wasn't the season they were hoping to have. Vasilevsky missed the first half of the year, came back, was a little rusty, but he had a full off season. They all had full off seasons, a healthy off seasons for the first time in a while. No Steven Stamkos, though. They've moved on from Stamkos. They moved on from Mikhail Sergachev. So it's going to be a bit of a new look, revamped Tampa Bay Lightning team. Jake Gensel is in tow now. How do you feel about the Lightning?
It's been a lot of crazy buzz around the Lightning. Obviously, letting Steven Stamkos, quote-unquote, walk. He heads to Nashville. And a big spot missing on that power play. Kucherov's guy. But I feel like my guy to fill that void is going to be Braden Point, playing that center, first center on Kucherov's line. He has always been, for me, the past 2.5 years, really undervalued. Like, the way and ability that he can score, his price has always been low.
I agree, but why would that change? Like, why do you think that's going to change this year? I think he's always been undervalued, but I think that like at this point, isn't that kind of just what his market's going to be? Like, sadly, as great of a player as he is, it just doesn't feel like people are willing to invest or collect him. Like people have always put their money towards Kucherov or towards Stamkos, I guess, in the past, and maybe that's the difference. But I don't know. Point has always been a good player. He's always been a 40-goal scorer, near 100-point player. Like, why would this year be any different?
I think just the ability to move off Stamkos from the power play kind of reminds me of the Washington Capitals and what they have going on, where the whole power play kind of runs through Alexander Ovechkin. But now with Stamkos out of the lineup, he's going to get a couple more looks now, Braden Point. And with Kucherov, the ability for him to just put it on a string on the money. We'll see. Maybe a couple one-timers in the slot. Point's going to be able to play that bumper role depending on where they play him. They obviously got Jake Gensel coming in. I feel like they're going to have the opportunity to finally maybe hit that 50-goal mark for Braden Point. And what did we say? Goal scorer by the hobby.
He had 51 a couple of years ago. So like he had 51 a couple of years ago and then 46 last year. But like it's interesting. It's like there are some players around the league where you scratch your head and you're like, this player should totally be worth more money. And Braden Point is one of those players. And it's just, I'm curious as to, what it would take to change, the market. So I'm interested to see if it does change. I believe it should. He is very undervalued. Like I have a lot of Braden Points and I feel like I've held just thinking like eventually it's going to catch. Eventually it's going to catch. So far it hasn't, but hey, maybe this is the year without Stamkos that he'll get more attention, I guess, on the Tampa Bay Lightning. Brendan Hagel is an interesting player for me. He's kind of similar where I think that he's just a little bit undervalued. He's been in Tampa for a couple of years now, and maybe he's someone who could pick up some of those power play goals as well. Like Brendan Hagel last year was terrific. Like honestly, Hagel I think was very underrated last year in terms of points. He was fifth on the team last year. He had 75 points, 26 goals, 75 points last year as a member of the Tampa Bay Lightning. And you can pick up his Young Guns for $45, like an 80-point player, $45 for a PSA 10 Young Gun, plays for a team that's going to go to the playoffs every year, that has a chance to win a Stanley Cup. Like, just feel like that's a super undervalued play as well. So Brendan Hagel's kind of my kind of hobby breakout candidate. And he's not young anymore. I think he's 26, 27, maybe turning this year. So maybe it's kind of gone a little bit past his time, but I still think that there's, some potential there if Hagel can pick up some of that offense that was left behind by Steven Stamkos. All right. The Detroit Red Wings. Interesting squad, the Detroit Red Wings. For the past few years, it's the team that's been ready to make the leap, ready to make the jump. Patrick Kane returns for a full season. They've got their two young guys signed, sealed, and ready to go, and Lucas Raymond and Mo Seider. I'm not sure who the hell's playing in net. They've got like 5 guys who could, but the old saying, if you got 4, you got none. That's kind of the situation in Detroit. How does it play out for them? Are they going to be one of those teams fighting for those last final playoff spots in the East? How do things shake out in Motown?
I think they should be. They're a better team than they were last year, and obviously just missed the playoffs by a toenail, like quite literally a toenail distance away. They scored in overtime. I think it was Lucas Raymond that got the winner, but then the same night, I believe it was, or was Washington. That Washington that ended up just sneaking in. So I remember following that, and that was just crazy. But I'm all on board for the Yzer plan. I think they're a better team than they were last year, which was a pretty good team. We saw some players really break out. Patrick Kane, still a shell of himself, but even more talented at his age and the surgeries that he's gone through. I feel like there's opportunity for them. And obviously within net, adding Cam Talbot, they got Alex Lyon as the backup, who I have always thought has been a good, solid backup or fringe starter that could really get it done, kind of reminding me of what Martin Jones did last year, where you could kind of lean on him if it does come that time. But for me, I feel like locking up Lucas Raymond is going to be the big difference that makes this team better. And signing him to an 8-year deal, Sider to a 7-year deal. I'm going to have Lucas Raymond as my breakout player. $80 price point where he used to be at that with almost, not even, I think it was around 150, 160 for his Young Guns PSA 10 just a couple of expos ago, if I remember, and the opportunity for him to score and be linked up with Patrick Kane, one of the best scorers and playmakers that has ever touched the game of hockey. A little bit of bias there, but this is going to be a big jump for the Detroit Red Wings.
I don't know how I feel about the team as a whole. I don't love the group. I think it's a little bit of mismatch. I don't know what they are. I don't know what the identity of this team is. Like, it seemed like they were gonna be a rebuilding young club who, okay, you make a couple of additions to try and add it, but then all of a sudden they made some more trades and they just kind of got older. And it's like, I don't know what to think of this team. I mean, they're going to be in the mix. They're going to be in the fight with the Buffaloes, the Ottawas of the world to try and, grab one of those final spots. But I don't know if they necessarily got much better from a season ago. I'll be curious. That's another team I'm a little lower on than most, I guess. I am high on Lucas Raymond, though, alongside with you. And I think what he showed in the back half of last year is that he is an elite goal scorer in this league. And I think that, with a full season, if he can get going just like he did a year ago, he's someone who could certainly, touch up on mid 30s, maybe, touch up on 40 goals this year. And goals sell, buddy. Goals sell.
Right.
It's an original six market. It's Hockey Town, Detroit. There's going to be some hobby hype that'll drive that if that is the case. So Lucas Raymond at $80, I think, is a super slept on price point. I mean, I remember picking those up. Yeah. Like getting them or seeing them stickered for like 125, 130, 140 at, a couple expos ago. And now you can get it for $80. I mean, yes, the market is down in general since then, but I would say that Raymond's a better player since then too. So I think it would make some sense, and he probably will be a triple digit, valued player at some point if he can build off of what he did a year ago.
Yep.
All right, the Buffalo Sabres. Buffalo Sabres turning back the clock, bringing in Lindy Ruff to be their coach. It's a team that really did not meet expectations a year ago, but coming into this season, I think there's still some believers out there. They've got the goaltending situation maybe figured out, possibly statistically. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen was one of the better goaltenders in the back half of the NHL season last year in terms of goals saved above expectation. Is it enough though? Is it enough to break the playoff drought? That's, I think, like 12 or 13 years old at this point
I think it's like
in
17.
Buffalo.
I think it's more. I think it's like 17. It feels like I've never watched in my lifetime Buffalo Sabres playoff
Yeah,
hockey.
you did. They were like back in the Danny Briere, Thomas Vanek. It would have been. I mean, you might only been like, say, 6 or 7. You're super, no. You're older than that. But I want to say like 2011. 2011 might have been their last time they made the playoffs, something like that. 2010, 2011.
We got to confirm this. So it seems like the last time the Buffalo Sabres made the playoffs was 2011. Okay, so I'm way off. Still losing in the first round, it seems like, in that year. But for this year, I don't really see the Sabres in the playoffs. And that's kind of the discussion with the Detroit Red Wings, the Ottawa Senators, and the Buffalo Sabres. Those are the three teams, the magic three, that I think one of the three will sneak into the playoffs, because being in such a tough division with Florida, with the Bruins, with the Leafs, with the Lightning, it's going to be tough to see one of those teams fall off. But a team that's built very well, strong defensively, looks like they got a good power play. Trading for Ryan McLeod, he's going to be a good second, third line center and fiddle around with Dylan Cousins, seeing who swaps there. I think there's a lot that needs to happen for this team before they can make the playoffs. Like, we're looking at some of the top-end talent that needs to show up. We're looking at a lot of the top-end teams in that division that needs to fall off. But it's a well-rounded team. There's a lot of players on this team that I look at and should say their prices should be more. Looking at Tage, looking at Dylan Cousins. But for me, the one guy that I'm going to look at and say, okay, from now to the end of the season, we will see an increase in price, has to be JJ Peterka. Watched this guy a couple times in person, had him on my fantasy in the later half of the playoff, and he really showed up, and he was a guy that's just exciting to watch. Really exciting, and I feel like that power play and his offensive firepower will see a lot of increase.
Yeah, I like Paterka. I have Dylan Cousins as my hobby breakout candidate. Just a guy who there was hype before, and then he had a down season last year, and it's tanked. It's down to $60. I mean, this was $100 PSA 10 last off season. So I think as long as the team performs this year and Dylan Cousins performs the way that he's capable of doing, I think that we could see that those prices jump back to kind of where they were. So I have belief that Cousins could be a number one or a strong number two center in this league, and get you upwards of 80 points in a season. So I believe that Cousins will have a better season. So I think right now he's pretty cheap to pick up at a $60 PSA 10. It's Canadian, 60 Canadian. So that's kind of my player to watch, hobby breakout candidate this year for the Buffalo Sabres. All right, the Florida Panthers, defending Stanley Cup champion, Florida Panthers. To do it again? You like the Panthers again this year?
I don't know. I think they have that Stanley Cup hangover effect dangling over their head because it was a long season. They went right down to the wire with Edmonton, took them right to a Game 7, or even better, Edmonton technically took them to a Game 7. One of the best playoff series that I've watched in a long time. And they were able to hold them off, win the Stanley Cup. But I don't know. I mean, they've always been an above average team, kind of finding themselves like the Boston Bruins, finding a way in the past 5 years to really be good. And the uptick, of their franchise in the past 5-6 years has really been great to see for the hobby, seeing some players really step up. And for me, I think Matthew Tkachuk is going to be that guy that has the opportunity to really excel in the hobby market. We've seen it before. We know how talented he is. We know how popular he is. And we've quite frankly just seen it before. I think it could be done again if he does find himself performing well this season.
You know what? I'm going to agree. I think Matthew Tkachuk is definitely a guy. And here's another angle, too, to think about. There's that new Amazon docuseries that is going to be released on October 4th. Matthew Tkachuk is a big proponent of it. I think there's 2 episodes that feature Matthew Tkachuk, like in depth, one of which being, during the Stanley Cup final, him versus McDavid. And that could spur some hobby hype too, right? Like I think that could, people could fall in love with Tkachuk through watching that and want to pick up his cards, and that could drive demand up. And that alone, even before the season starts, so like before October 4th, might be a good idea to pick up some Tkachuk, because I think there's a possibility that that series could drum up some interest for a bunch of different players. Maybe that's what we can get into next week, perhaps. But that's one of the reasons why I believe Tkachuk is a pretty good buy right now and a guy to watch. Someone on the cheaper end though, like I look at a guy like Anton Lundell, who had a really good playoff for the Florida Panthers. He had 17 points in 24 games. Not a big time goal scorer per se, but I think that he's somebody who's just a really good player, real sound player. So he's someone else who, maybe you could think about, picking him up if you see it cheap enough. It's about a $50 PSA 10 Young Guns right now. But I would say Tkachuk probably is the top dog, I would say, when it comes to the Florida Panthers.
Yep.
All right, let's move over into the Atlantic Division, and let's start with the New York Rangers, the Big Apple. What do you think? How the Rangers doing this year?
Sorry, you just cut out there. I think the Rangers are finally going to be able to make their way to the Stanley Cup final. Last year coming just so close. And the offensive talent on this team, there's so many players, talking about Artemi Panarin, Chris Kreider, Trocheck, who had a breakout season last year, Shesterkin in net, one of the best goaltenders in the league. It's a monstrous team and almost a sleeping giant that should come and sweep this league silly, but it feels like they haven't really been able to do that just yet. I think it could be the year. Artemi Panarin really went off last year. He's going to be my player that I have my eye on from a hobby perspective. $100 to $120 in a Young Gun PSA 10. And there's just a lot of upside when you pick up his cards because he is one of the better offensive talented players in the league.
I have the same question, I guess, with Braden Point that I have with Panarin, where it's like maybe the market's just not there though, because why hasn't it exploded yet because he is one of the better players in the league, right? He had 120 points last year. Like, I don't know if he can do that again. That's a lot of points to score in one season in the NHL. Like, if he didn't see that jump last year, why this year?
Well, there was a little bit of a jump. I mean, coming off what people would call a down year when he still had, I believe it was 91, 92 points. His Young Guns were only going for around $70 to $85. It was insane how cheap they were. I remember I had one exclusively at the beginning of September. And I remember it like no tomorrow because I was like, I'm really going to sell this thing for $80? Like $80 for a Panarin? Still sold it because that's what they were going for. But they did see, he did see a little bit of a jump with an amazing season. I feel like we could still see that again. He could push for that 120, 130, 135 point mark and really excel in the hobby. But similar like we talked about with Braden Point, same boat. So,
yeah, it's just there gets to a point where I feel like there's like, I don't know, like an expiration date sometimes on some players, especially when it comes to like the hobby market. And I just wonder if a guy like Panarin at 32, 33 years old, how many people are speculating on Panarin? And unfortunately, speculation does drive the market a lot. But a guy that's young enough to speculate on, in my opinion, is still Alexis Lafreniere. And he's someone for me who I think could have a big hobby breakout this year. We saw him in the playoffs kind of, come into his own and become the player that we all thought he could be when he was that number one pick a few years back. And he really started to show it, really started to show it. He's a really big, strong kid who's taking the puck to the net. He was finishing. He was having some outstanding moves, breakaways. Like he looked every bit of a number one star player. And you can get his PSA 10 right now for about 185. They got up to like 250 during the playoffs, so we know that there's a ceiling that's a lot higher than that. And if he can really take a step this year, and he's somebody who could get into the 100-point range if he really does, because he's playing with Panarin right now. I believe it's Panarin, him, and maybe Trocheck is on that line too, I believe. Dude, like that he could pile up a lot of points. And for a French Canadian to do that, I think that that's going to be a very fruitful thing for people who are invested in Laffy. So he's someone for me to watch. And I think the Rangers are going to be cup contenders always with the squad that they have, right? Adam Fox, Shesterkin, Panarin, Laffy, Zibanejad, Chris Kreider, go down the list. They've got so many star players. I truly believe that the Rangers are such a well-built team, one of the best built teams in the NHL. So I think they're going to have a great year, go to the playoffs again, and maybe Sexy Lexi have another big season for the Rags. All right, the other team in New York, the Islanders, who they make the playoffs last year. I think they just made the playoffs last year. I'm trying to remember now if they even did, but they were in the mix. They got a new coach, and I think they just snuck in. I don't know why I can't remember who they've played in round one.
I don't believe they made the playoffs last year from what I remember. I could quickly check. No, I don't see them in the no. I don't see.
Yeah, it would have been Carolina, New York, and Washington, no?
Let's see. We got first round. So they were a wild card team last year, losing to Carolina, who then went on to play the New Jersey Devils
2 years ago.
Right?
That would have been 2 years ago.
Let's see here.
Anyways, because Jersey didn't make the playoffs last year for sure.
Oh,
either way, the Islanders. I never loved this team, but they always seem to overperform. And now they got a full year under their belt with Patrick Waugh. And I'm looking at their card market. I'm looking at players, and I'm like, no one speaks to me here. Like, I don't know about you, but like I look at the Islanders, and from like a collecting perspective or an investing, flipping, speculating, however you want to call it, there really wasn't a lot that I looked at and was like, oh, this is a good team, and oh, this might be a good player to invest in. It's just not a market that I love from a hockey card perspective.
There's even just one player that really stood out to me, and he's been that player for the past 4 or 5 years, ever since he was drafted. I looked at Noah Dobson as well, and I thought, you know what? Maybe we could see a final uptick in price, but we saw that last year. He played great. His Young Guns are going for about 100 to 115 in a PSA 10. But even if he does have that great offensive season like he had last year, I can't really see it surpassing that 140, 150 mark. Matthew Barzal is going to be my guy. $70 in the Young Gun PSA 10 feels cheap, similar in that boat like Braden Point and Artemi Panarin. It's that big question that stands out to you. Why haven't we seen that massive increase in price? Even last year, he finally had that return to glory that we've been waiting for ever since that rookie season where he played just phenomenal. And for the New York Rangers to be missing that big gap, that big star, it feels like he should finally be the guy to step up because, like you said, there was almost nobody on this team. Nobody.
Yeah. What I will say about these players like the Panarins, the Barzels, the Braden Point, like that market is at least there is less volatility and there's not as much speculation in those markets, which means yes, you may not see the big boom, but you're also not going to see a massive drop off. So it's not like you can't lose your shirt. Like if you buy a Cole Caulfield or whatever at $200 and then he goes out and has a terrible season, that thing's going to drop pretty drastically, right? Like Alexis Lafreniere, you buy it at 185, he has a bad year, that thing's probably going to end up dropping, right? Like it's similar to all the players that we've really been talking about. But some of these guys that have pretty established markets, like a Barzal at $70, even if he goes out and doesn't have a great year, it's still probably going to sell for about $70. Like you can recoup your money pretty easily with guys like that. Same with Panarin and Point, because they're already quite cheap. And like in your head, you're like, that seems like a good price, even if in about a bad year. Seems like it would be a good price to buy at. So that is the benefit, I guess you could say, to guys like that. The Philadelphia Flyers, not a great hockey club. There's a couple of young players that I think I'm excited to watch, to be honest with you, like Cutter Gauthier, who again I think is going to be a chase for Series 1 hockey that's going to be coming out this year. But ultimately, I think it's a team that punched above their weight for most of last year. And I don't think they're going to be able to do the same this season. I don't think they're going to be a very competitive team. I don't think they're going to win a lot of games. They don't have any goaltending, really, for obvious reasons. I think that there's some guys who could score, and they'll score some goals, but ultimately they're going to be outscored by their oppositions most nights because of the bad goaltending. A couple players that I like as possible hobby breakout stars. I think Bobby Brink is an interesting player. He's someone who could score if given the opportunity, could play on the power play a little bit. His Young Guns PSA 10 is selling for like $25-$30. I just think that's super cheap. And all he has to do is like come up with a 25 goal season. And all of a sudden, you would think that could climb to $40-$50. That's 2x in your money at that point, if you can scoop it up for $25 Canadian. And then Tyson Forster is another interesting player. I actually do like him as a player. He scored 20 goals his rookie year last season. He's a 22-23 Young Guns. You can get his PSA 10 for about $90 right now. But there could be some hype if he's playing on a line with Cutter Gauthier and things, or not Cutter Gauthier, sorry. Matvei Michkov actually is who I'm going to talk about. Matvei Michkov, could help drive hype if he comes in and plays, at a high level right away alongside Forster. I think that could definitely increase his hobby hype. So those are kind of two players who I'm taking a look at for the Flyers.
Yeah, you kind of took a good look at Bobby Brink there too. Last year, he played a couple games, obviously bouncing up and down from the AHL, NHL. It was tough for him to really facilitate as a starter, even on that power play. But he's so damn cheap. I mean, it costs $25-$30 to even grade a card, and to grab that in a PSA 10 is just ridiculous. My guy, though, who I think will be pretty good for the Philadelphia Flyers, maybe not a big increase, has got to be Jamie Drysdale. Criminally low. He's always been low. And an offensive defenseman.
That's your guy. That is your guy. Jamie Drysdale is your guy.
He's always been cheap. I feel like there's going to be that opportunity for him one day. It sounds crazy, but to be $100 Young Gun PSA 10 in that same mix like Noah Dobson, maybe not on the best, most exciting team, but still one of the only offensive defensemen on that team that can really run a power play. And he's been injury riddled, missed a good chunk of last year. I think he missed like 70 games. So it's finally going to be that season where he can maybe grab that power play and run with it. And even in fantasy, I got my eye on him too. So Jamie Drysdale's my guy.
Yeah, health has been the biggest issue for him. Like he's a good player, he's a smart player, but can he stay healthy? If he can, I think he has a big year and a good career, and certainly there's a lot of growth potential in that market. Absolutely. All right, the New Jersey Devils, probably last year's biggest disappointment. I would say didn't make the playoffs. You've got hobby darlings like Jack Hughes, Luke Hughes on the team. They bring in Jacob Markstrom. They've addressed the goaltending position. I love the New Jersey Devils this year. I think this is a dark horse Stanley Cup team. I don't even know if dark horse is even, the correct word to use. I just think they're cup contenders regardless. I think sports books have them as like third highest odds or something like that to win the cup. So dark horse is definitely not the word to use. I think they are legit contenders. They got a new coach too in Sheldon Keefe, who we know well from, watching a lot of Toronto Maple Leafs games. Good coach. I do think he's a good coach. Um, and then if they could just stay healthy, like Dougie Hamilton's back, Jack Hughes, if he can remain healthy all season, Nico Heischer's missed a lot of time throughout his career. Jesper Bratt took his game to the next level last season. I really, really like the Devils. And another guy who I kind of think could be a possible hobby breakout candidate is one of their RFAs that they just signed to a contract. It's Dawson Mercer, who's going to want to prove himself. He didn't get the big 7-8 year deal that some of these other RFAs got. He had to sign that bridge deal, in the 3 million range. And he's got to prove like, hey, I'm worth investing in. I am a long-term play. I can be a 30 goal scorer in this league on a regular basis. And at $50 for a PSA 10 Young Guns, I remember when that was like $100 card last summer, had a really down year. Really, really down season in his sophomore campaign. So I think that he comes out this year, gets more opportunity. I like Dawson Mercer as a possible hobby breakout candidate at $50. I think there's a lot of growth potential there.
Yeah, I think they addressed a lot of the issues that New Jersey's been waiting to address. Obviously, that goaltender hole has been massive for them. They haven't been able to step up to the plate when it comes playoff time. And obviously, last year, not even making the playoffs. I'm on the opposite side of things, though. I feel like I have New Jersey just kind of making the playoffs, almost borderline, should I dare to say, not make the playoffs, which is really, really against the grain, considering the two teams that most people are on this year is the New Jersey Devils and the Nashville Predators. But I've been pretty consistent to say I feel like these are my two teams that could kind of scrape their way to the playoffs or just miss it. So I almost actively
Why?
want to
Why?
go.
Why? I need to know why. I need to know why you believe that.
I just feel like, Jack Hughes, the issue with him has always been injury. So he wasn't my hobby breakout guy. He's obviously a hobby darling, like you mentioned right off the top. But if he misses any time, we saw last year their team just plummet and fall and dumpster dive. And they're a great team. Hear me out. They had a 15 to 20 game win streak last year going on at the start of the season. Jack Hughes was in the race for the Hart Trophy. One of the best players in the league by far, most exciting players to watch. But we've seen time after time him get injured, miss games, obviously coming off of shoulder surgery, which should help him succeed because that's what we've seen be the issue. But if he falters and doesn't play well this year or gets injured and misses time, this team is really going to feel it. So for me, I think that's where I'm going to point my finger on.
Shout out to the Gong Show for bringing this up in their podcast this past weekend, or Monday, whatever. I think it was Mondays they put out their episode. They were talking about guys where it's like, hobby, uh, like this is kind of their make or break season, and they talked about Jack Hughes. Is he in a make or break season when it comes to the hobby? Like, looked like he was ready to take that step into superstardom last year. Right at the beginning of the season, you saw his young guns explode. Was going, upwards of $400 ish, $500 for like a PSA 10. And it was like, okay, is he going to take that next step and get into the McKinnons and, the Matthews and that step and become a top 10 player in the NHL? And he got hurt. So it didn't happen. Is this kind of, to go back to the question that the Gong Show is asking, could this be his make or break season for the hobby and for him himself on the ice, where if he doesn't have that big step this year where he gets himself into that Matthews McDavid echelon or Matthews McKinnon echelon, never McDavid, obviously. Is this kind of the year he has to do it? And then, then it's just like, probably won't if he doesn't get there. Like, is this that make or break year for him?
think so, because his hobby prices saw such a massive increase when he was playing well last year. If he doesn't play 70 to 80 games this year, I feel like that's where the future of investment comes, and the issue to invest in some of his big cards. Because when it comes to a player, you need to see longevity. You need to see 15, 10, even 10 to 15 to 20-year careers where the opportunity to hold a player, invest in a player, because you know they're going to play many years down the road comes. And if he can't play over 50 games this year, I feel like there's going to be a massive, massive drop in his prices. So I have my eye on Jack Hughes, and I hate to say it, but I feel like injuries could be the difference for this New Jersey Devils team.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point you bring there, where people don't necessarily want to invest in guys who have, the Band-Aid moniker, which unfortunately Jack Hughes has to this point in his career. All right, let's move over to the Pittsburgh Penguins. Sid the Kid upped himself for another couple of years in Pittsburgh. They didn't do a whole lot to change their roster this past season. How do you feel the Pittsburgh Penguins will do? They missed out on the playoffs last year. Can they fight and get themselves back into it this year?
I think they're going to miss too. It's kind of a tough team to really look at because we've seen the opportunity for them to be so successful last year. Obviously, Stanley Cup aspirations to playoff missers last year, which is a massive, massive end of the scope that we saw. I don't think Kyle Dubas was prepared for that. And to have Erik Karlsson, Chris Letang still fighting for that power play one, it was never going to mesh. It was never going to work. I feel like it's going to be tough to see what they do this year. Obviously, goaltending for me is still a question mark. Tristan Yari. That name always mixes me up. I don't know why. Still a question mark in net for me. I don't think they're going to be a playoff team. I think it's going to be a big season coming from Sidney Crosby. Always a great investment. Always a great investment to grab Crosby stuff. Well established. This stuff in the next 2-3 years, whatever he decides to play out, really doesn't matter to his hobby price come 10 years from now. It's not going to be the tail of the tape for him, but I do think that the one player is the newest addition, Cody Glass, for me. And I know you want to get into as to why, but I feel like his injury status has always been the reason as to why I'm jumbling my words right now, why his prices have been so low. $30 in a young gun, PSA 10, dead cheap. Maybe he could learn something from one of the best centers in the game, but Cody Glass is going to be my guy.
It's funny because I remember at one point, like when he came out, the Young Gun came out, it was like a $25 raw Young Gun. And now you can pick it up in a PSA 10 for $30. And there's probably less than 1,000 PSA 10s, I would imagine, for pop count, probably a low pop. For a couple of reasons. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. There's just, there's not a lot of breakout candidates because it's such an old roster, right? So it's like there's a lot of guys whose markets are kind of already established. So Cody Glass is one of the few guys who are really just under that umbrella. Maybe Michael Bunting could see a rebound, possibly. Like he had a pretty good market when he was in Toronto, and then he left Carolina and it went down. And he came back and played well. They get like 7 goals, something like that, in 15 games when he got traded back to Pittsburgh. So right now he's slated to skate on line with Geno Malkin. So maybe a Michael Bunting could possibly be another guy to keep an eye on in terms of there being some hobby growth, some growth in his market. But other than that, yeah, it's just not an attractive. I mean, Crosby's always attractive. Malkin's always attractive, obviously, when it comes to their hobby markets. But when you're talking about some new blood, not a whole lot going on there. It's an old team, aging team. So are the Washington Capitals, old aging team. And really the number one thing that Washington's going to be worried about this year is getting Ovi as close as possible, if not breaking the goals record. I believe he needs, 42 goals, I think, right now to break Wayne Gretzky's goal record. So that's going to be the first and only objective for the Capitals, I think, this year. But do they make the playoffs? They snuck in last year. And they made some interesting changes to their group this past summer. They brought in Pierre-Luc Dubois. They brought in Jacob Chipgren. They brought in, I think Brendan Dillon is also over there on the Washington Capitals. And Andrew Mangiapane they brought in as well. So they got an interesting group over there. Oh, no, it was Matt Roy, not Dillon.
Dillon went to New Jersey.
Right. Matt Roy ended up there. But
Logan Thompson.
Logan Thompson, your boy, Brock University legend, Logan Thompson. Yeah, it's an interesting little overhaul that they had in Washington. I actually like what they did. I think they can compete for a playoff spot. I think they're going to be right back into the mix. I think Ovi's going to score in and around, the 35 to 42 goal mark. I think he'll be close. I do. I don't see him in the 20s. I see him in the 30s. If not hitting four, if he gets to like 38, 39, I think he pushes and gets to 40, 41, 42, which is what he's going to need to break the record. And then, dude, like, how do you anticipate the Ovechkin market performing as he gets closer and closer to breaking Gretzky's record? Like, that's gonna explode his market this year. So, like, if you talk about maybe, what are you doing when it comes to the Washington Capitals? Loading up on some Ovi might not be a bad play either. Again, very established player, very expensive player, but right now, while there's a lot of hype, there's going to be even more the closer he gets to breaking the record. And by the way, unload before he breaks the record, unload around goal 38, 39. That might be a smart play too when it comes to the Washington Capitals this year from a hobby perspective.
Yeah, I think for Ovi's status coming close to that record, yeah, I don't think he's going to be able to break it this year. I feel like he'll come close. I feel like he'll give you 25 to 35 goals. That's going to be the mark for him, but that's going to be the cap. 35, I'm going to cap it right out of that. He looks a lot slower than he used to be, obviously, but considering Crosby looks just as good, if not even better than what he used to be, and his game's really developed to even change and be better than that fast, speedy player, but just as offensively talented. I don't have Ovi breaking the record this year, but if he does, that's going to be a 40-plus goal season with a record, with most likely a team that is going to be close to the playoffs. There's going to be a lot of buzz around Ovi if he does come close to that record, but I feel like we're going to have to wait until the beginning to mid of next season.
But besides Ovi, who else do you think is investable at this point in the market?
I think I got Dylan Strome. He's going to be playing on Ovi's line. He played well last year. Still a cheap player relatively, but he still has that price that is fair. I think the average, when we look at a player of his status, would be around $35 to $45 in a Young Guns PSA 10, sitting at $60 in a PSA 10. I feel like it's fair. It's not low. It's not too cheap for him, but there is still a lot of opportunity if he can find himself assisting a lot of those soon to come Ovi goals, because we know Ovi is going to put it in the back of the net on that power play. So
yeah, it's just he fits in the same bill as like the points and the Panarins, where it's like, how come he hasn't gotten the Hobby Love yet?
yeah.
So, but maybe now playing alongside and being the go-to setup man to Ovechkin, maybe that is what the tipping point is for a guy like Dylan Strome. I kind of like Connor McMichael a lot. I think that he's a really good, talented young player. He's going to be playing in the top six. He's going to have a lot more opportunity. Thought he played well in the back half of last season for the Washington Capitals. He's currently slated to be on a line with Pierre-Luc Dubois and Tom Wilson. So I think at $45 Canadian, which is what you can get his PSA 10 at right now, I think that's a pretty good price. I think that he's someone who you could see kind of start to tick up a little bit. He's still pretty young, like 23 years old, 22, 23. So I like McMichael. So he's the player for Washington that I think could be a possible hobby breakout candidate. The Carolina Hurricanes, they lost a lot this offseason. Like, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at what their lineup looks like this year, but they lost a lot on the back end. They were unable to retain Jake Gensel. They didn't really replace him either. This is a group that I still think is going to be a playoff team, but I do think it's going to be a small step back year for the Carolina Hurricanes. That being said, I still think that there's a couple of players who they're banking on some internal improvements. One of which, Anthony, I think is Seth Jarvis, who they just paid a boatload of money to. Like, this guy got paid a lot, and it seemed like an overpayment. But I would imagine they looked at Seth Jarvis and believe he's going to be a star for us. Like, he is going to be one of the best players that we have on our team, and we're going to lock him up long term. He's going to be given every opportunity, top power play, top line time. And right now you can pick up his PSA 10 Young Guns for like $75. I just truly believe that Seth Jarvis is a player that probably could, get into the $100 range quite quickly. I think 75 is super slept on. So that for me is kind of a hobby breakout candidate. I think there'll be a lot of buzz around Jarvis this year. I think he's gonna have a great season, and I think it'll be reflected in his hobby pricing.
Yeah, Seth Jarvis is one of the guys too that I had eye on, but number one for me has to be Sebastian Aho. I feel like he's due for a really big pop, and it feels like there's so many teams on this play, so many
You
players on this
love
team.
like your list is just littered with guys where it's just like, how do they not have the hobby love? But then it's just like they just
It,
haven't.
it,
Like again, Point, Panarin, Sebastian Aho, they're all similar where it's like they're all stars. They're all so good. And they all, in terms of play, seem very undervalued in the market, but then never end up actually popping off or getting that love. It's so strange. This hobby is so weird.
it's crazy because Aho, it feels like he's due to finally hit 100 points, maybe even more. And he's one of those exciting players where you could see it. He could score goals too. And I know with Svechnikov, who's been dealing with injuries the past 2 seasons, he's another guy who obviously one of the most talented players in the NHL. It sounds crazy to see, but watching him play, he's very talented. And he's so far has
Shoot
never
the puck.
amounted. Oh, yeah, he's never amounted to what he was supposed to be. So for him on a line with Sebastian Aho and Seth Jarvis, there's a lot of opportunity for Aho to get some of those secondary, first primary assists and really stack up points this year. And sitting at $100 in a Young Guns PSA 10, a lot of room for growth.
I do like Aho a lot as a player. All right. And the final team to get to here in the Metro Division that'll close out the Eastern Conference end of things is the Columbus Blue Jackets. Obviously, it's a tough situation in Columbus this year. The roster's not very good, and they lost not only Patrick Laine, but obviously lost Johnny Gaudreau, rest in peace, after that horrible accident. So I'm not expecting a big season out of the Columbus Blue Jackets. I just, it's just not a team that I think is going to win a whole lot of games. They didn't do anything in net, which was a big issue last year with Merzlikins. And yeah, I'm not big on them. Not big on them. But I do think that there's a couple of young players who are ready to kind of, break out in their own rights, and we could possibly see some love go towards them. So Adam Fantilli is an interesting player for me. Like, is PSA 10 Young Guns right now is a little high, I think, at $200. And I could see it dipping at some point, but then at some point, I believe that Fantilli will figure things out. And then all of a sudden, that's probably a $300 to $400 card. Like, if Fantilli really becomes a superstar, top center in this league, like I believe he has the ability to be at some point down the road. I think that that's a card that could grow from $200. Like I said, I expect it to be a roller coaster ride until we get there. I think that it could dip at some point. Maybe that's when you buy. Maybe now is not the time to buy. But if the Blue Jackets get off to a slow start, Fantilli gets off to a slow start, maybe it dips to 170, 160, and that would be a perfect time to buy. But he is kind of a hobby breakout candidate that I believe will garner some interest here. So Adam Fantilli is kind of my guy to watch.
Oh, there's lots of opportunity for him too. The only reason why I didn't have him on my list or my particular player to break out is because where his price is at right now. But you said it perfectly. The opportunity that he has on this team, obviously, he could be one of the best offensive forwards on this team that now lacks some of that firepower that they had just last season. Obviously, like you said, rest in peace, Johnny Gaudreau, a tragic situation. But for me, I'm going to go with Kent Johnson to be my breakout player. Still cheap, $70 in a PSA 10, and he does have that hype. Obviously, really came around the time that he did the Michigan goal. One of the coolest Michigan goals I've ever seen, and his prices really ticked up when that happened. But he's still a great player coming from the NCAA, and a lot of opportunity on this Columbus team. So keep your eye on this roster because someone has to score the goals, and I think it's going to be one of these two players. So I feel like we're going to do pretty good picking these two.
And there you have it. There's the Eastern Conference breakdown of each team, how we think they're going to do, and maybe some players to watch from a hobby perspective. Really quickly, we'll do some hobby news, then we'll get to the pickups. So, hobby news Series 1 has been announced. The release date for 24-25 Series 1. It's going to come out Wednesday, October 16th. So, not too far from now, actually. And we should be getting, a list of the Young Guns that'll be coming out pretty soon. But the expected Young Guns that I think will be part of it, again, I haven't seen an official list. This is just my speculation, Anthony. I think Cutter Gauthier is going to be headlining the class. He played one game last year, which means he's eligible to have a Young Guns. Logan Stankoven, I think, is a player who they held and didn't put in extended and believe that he should be a guy who they want to sell as one of the headliners in Series 1. Jesper Wallstedt, the goaltender from the Minnesota Wild, I think is another one who probably will see his Young Guns here. Brennan Othman, Lane Hudson, Matt Rempe, I think also could potentially see his Young Guns wind up here in Series 1. I think that would make a lot of sense too. The Empire State Building, lots of people gonna wanna pick up that guy. Remember how expensive Arbor Jack Guys cards were when they first came out? I think we could see something similar with Rempe. Just the hype, just people love him, right? Just a lovable character in the NHL. And if he can get off to a good start, couple of tilts early on in the season, Rempe might be a high selling Young Guns when this stuff comes out on October 16th. Seeing pre-orders for about $149.99 plus tax. That's Canadian, which means we're back to what it was pre-Bedard, which is essentially what we all expected to happen. So the Bedard tax is gone. There's no Bedard level player in this series. So $149, $150 plus tax is what you're looking at for a hobby box. And I still think that's a little expensive for what you're looking at in terms of it being, just a flagship product, considering, it wasn't that long ago, maybe about 8 to 10 years ago, it was like $100 a box. And, we've seen a 50% markup since then. So, but it is what it is. That's where the hobby's at this point. And so, yeah, Wednesday, October 16th, Series 1 coming out. So be ready for that. Coming out today, though, OPC Platinum came out today, Anthony. So that's available wherever you can buy your cards. $400 a box for OPC Platinum.
That's crazy.
Yeah, you get 12 packs in a box, 12 cards per pack, and you are guaranteed one autograph per box. So just one auto. It's not even technically guaranteed a rookie auto. It's just one auto in general. You and I were looking at what these cards look like, and I guess I could actually pull it up because I do have, I did bring it up here. Let me just pull it up quickly. But you were not a fan of the look of OPC Platinum this year.
No, not really. For me, it didn't really give that look that we're so used to with OPC Platinum. I feel like it's kind of resembles the Panini Prism that we've seen from years past. That nice glossy look to it, but this just doesn't look great. It kind of reminds me of the vintage OPC Platinum, like from 2015, 2016, which I personally was not too much of a fan of. I'm not really in love with these cards at all. They don't really look too great, but they're pretty cool. They look cool. The look of them is pretty sweet, but like for me, it's just not really. That's not the thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. I understand that, it's OPC paper and OPC Platinum, and they basically just took the paper cards and just like put a chromium on them, and we're like, all right, there we go. Now we've got Platinum all sorted out. And like, I don't know, it does look a little. I'm not a big fan either. Aesthetically, I don't think it looks great what they've done. So I'm not a massive fan of what this looks like. Even these like showmanship. This doesn't do it for me. This is nothing. This is just a player on a blank background, and I don't know. It's just like this is supposed to be a big chase. 1 in 576 packs. Like, what is this? What is this card? This is nothing for me. What does that do for anyone? Personally, I don't know.
Nothing for me.
This Sweet Selections auto, like, okay, that one's not bad, but stuff like these two, it's just like these do nothing for me, honestly. Absolutely nothing. So yeah, I'm not personally running out to buy myself any of these anytime soon. I think I'll wait for the OPC Platinum rookie autos to hit the singles market, and that's probably what I'll wait on. Maybe buy a Fantilli, potentially, I think Bedard's going to be stupid expensive to start, like always. So probably stay away from the Bedsy ones. But, there's a couple other rookies that definitely, are attractive. Matthew Nyes, someone we talked about, could be in for a big year. Maybe think about picking some of that up. But overall, OPC Platinum doesn't seem to be much of a home run this year like it typically has been. That's my thoughts on it.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
All right, buddy. Show and tell time. You were at the big show over the weekend, and I'm sure I know you made a bunch of pickups and made a bunch of plays. First of all, how's the show? And then we can get into the pickups.
It was good. We set up for the first time ever at the CSC show, and although it was a mix of sports cards and TCG, a little bit of everything there, it was a crazy crowd. Like, just an awesome show. Shout out the boys at CSC that make it all happen. Talked to Eli there. 10 out of 10 show. Had a great time. Talked to great people. Made a lot of good sales. Made a lot of good pickups. Just 10 out of 10 for me. If you're thinking of setting up in the future, I 100% recommend it, and I will 1,000% be set up next time, just because the sheer opportunity to see people walking the floor, talking about cards, picking up cards, trading, like it felt like the entire show. There were 3 people at our table covering the entire thing, making deals, making trades. So it was a 10 out of 10 show for me. The pickups were pretty good. I picked up a lot of things, sold a lot of things. Felt like I almost bought too much. But, I mean, the ability to pick up some great cards was definitely there. So to start off for me, and I don't even know if you've seen some of these pickups yet, but I picked up this cool out of 5, the cup. I got to show it with
it's a sick
the light.
patch.
Could be better. But an absolutely nasty patch. This Cale Makar 3-color patch. It's blue, white, and purple. So for me, this was a must when I saw this. Out of 5, really sweet. It was awesome. So one of my favorite pickups for sure this weekend. And you can't go wrong picking up stuff out of the cup. That was sweet.
No. Stuff out of the cup, star player, 3 colors, great patch.
Oh,
that's right in my wheelhouse. Love that card.
So that was a sweet card. Next up, sticking with the cup. I was all over the cup this weekend, but I picked up this William Eklund, one of the most popular players at the show. People picking him up, people talking about him. This one's out of $249, but his hobby buzz has really, really skyrocketed around the shows. His prices haven't seen it as much, not a crazy increase. But when people see like a William Eklund Future Watch, they know that there's a lot of opportunity for him this year with Macklin Celebrini, and his prices aren't too crazy. Future Watch is going for around 100 to 150, depending on where you pick it up, but had to score the cup auto.
Sounds like something that might come up next week when we do the Western Conference previews.
Yep, there we go. But sticking with the Sharks here, picked up this Logan Couture Future Watch, and he's always been super cheap. And I feel like with his injuries, this was a must. Picked it up for dirt cheap. So I feel like this was a no-brainer when I saw it. I don't know if I want to keep it for myself or if I want to sell it just because its prices are so low right now. Probably a tough card to hold on to, but I feel like there's a lot of hockey fans that would love to grab that for their own collection. 2 more cards here, sticking with the Avs, and I got a nice little patch autograph of Nathan McKinnon. This one's out of $199. Panini Prime 2013-14, I believe, was his rookie year. And a really sweet patch. A really sweet auto. I've always liked his autograph, and his prices are dirt cheap for me. I picked up a nice 4 lot of all rookie Nathan McKinnon cards, which was really sweet. So I'm really happy picking that one up. And probably last but not least, one of my favorite pickups of the weekend. This card is just absolutely disgusting. I don't even know what it will go for. I don't know what it will sell for. I don't know if I'm even looking to sell it. But this out of 3 Nathan McKinnon Adidas neckline patch out of Premier, 2 out of 3 is just disgusting. I think this card is so sweet. I don't know if I'll be selling it anytime soon, but then again, I tell myself that, and then 2-3 weeks down the road, it's been gone. It's long gone. So we'll see.
Always a price. There's always a price.
So that was definitely one of my favorite pickups of the weekend. No doubt.
Yeah, that's a sick card. Personally, I think I like the Cale Makar one the best. That one to me was probably the top pickup. Yeah, that's such an awesome card. Honestly, that's big for me. That's right up my alley. The type of stuff, low numbered.
That's sweet.
High-end cup, patch, great player, good pickup. Like it
Yep.
a lot.
Thanks, buddy.
I was not at the show. I was unable to make it out there, but I did have a few pickups. Actually, let me just pull it up. I do not have it on my person, but I did send myself a photo. Yeah, we could look at it like this. Yeah, it was kind of an interesting lot pickup that I just grabbed from let me just there we go.
There you go.
There we go.
Look at that Lodge bomb.
So yeah, well, he had just announced that he was retiring, and I saw it sitting in the bin. And I was like, you know what? Let me pick this up because that's just a cool thing to put in the collection. Like I don't know how many more autos Woj is going to be signing. So I definitely thought that was a worthwhile pickup. A couple of football and some baseball prospects that I also picked up. This LeBron James card, actually, I know we're a hockey podcast. But this one, sometimes you get really lucky when you grab stuff and you don't realize, that you've grabbed a variation or like a super short print of some kind. But that's what this turned out to actually be. So I got it for a really good price and it turned out to be worth, significantly more, it turns out. So that was a nice surprise to get this LeBron James. It's like call it like a sparkle card. I don't know, like sparkle type, mosaic sparkle. So that was cool. But yeah, and then just picked up some cheap young guns down below there. They got them chilling in a dollar bin, got them pretty cheap for a couple of bucks a piece. So yeah, nothing too crazy this week. But I am hoping to get out to a show this weekend at some point, and hopefully I'll have more and better pickups for you guys next week because we got a couple shows. There's actually a Scarborough show. It's a new show that's going to be in Scarborough on Saturday, and then the Steeltown Collectible Show in Copetown Dundas is on Sunday. So an opportunity if you're in the Toronto GTA / Niagara Hamilton region. Couple of shows for you to check out this weekend. I don't know if you saw anything else that's out there, but I saw those two shows popping up, and I'll probably attend one of them. I don't know which one, but one of them I plan on hitting up for sure.
Yeah.
All right. That'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe right here on YouTube. And for you on-the-go listeners, you can also find the podcast that's available on Spotify. Just search up the Hockey Card Haven podcast. We'll be back next Wednesday. We'll go through the Western Conference and all 16 teams out west and do the same thing all over again. So check back in next Wednesday with another episode of the Hockey Card Haven podcast.